Hi, Shale.
Hi, Leora. Hello, everyone. Oh, good. I see Geshe has joined. Okay, so hello, everyone. Uh, Thank you all for joining. It's good to see you all here. Hello, Geshema.
Hello.
Great. So I want to mention that all activity of Dharma Friends of Israel is that voluntary, also of course by our teachers. And if you want to support the activity of Dharma Friends of Israel and of course Geshema for the wonderful teaching she's giving us, I wanted to count how many lessons we already had, but I will tell you next week. I think it's interesting. I'm pasting here in the chat the link for PayPal, so you can use that if you want to make a donation. And also there is my email if you want to send questions that I'm passing on to Geshema. So thank you all and thank Geshema.
Okay, great. Let's start then, as usual, with some breathing meditation before setting the motivation. Now, the space in front of you, visualize Buddha Shakyamuni in the form of a fully ordained monk, inseparable from your personal Lama. And surrounding the Buddha are the great beings from India, great masters like Nagarjuna, Ayadeva, and so forth. The great masters of Tibet. And of the different traditions, the other different Buddhist traditions. All inseparable and of one nature with your own Lama. And then surrounding us are all sentient beings. With endless and unbearable sufferings. Due to their basic confusion. And since all sentient beings are just like myself, there's no difference in terms of the actual nature of our mind. Try to generate a feeling of closeness and affection towards all these limitless sentient beings that are just like us. Especially in their wish to be happy, not to suffer. And from within that feeling of closeness and affection, generate the wish. May they all be free from all their sufferings, their afflictions, the contaminated karmic imprints, and most importantly, may they all be free from their ignorance, their misapprehension of reality. And may I be able to help them to free themselves from that basic misapprehension and all the problems that it leads to. And that mind of great compassion then becomes stronger, turns into the special altruistic attitude that is determined. I'll do whatever I can, and however long it takes, to assist sentient beings in the removal of their basic ignorance, the other afflictive emotions, contaminated karma, and all their sufferings. And since we can realistically do that most effectively only once we become enlightened, become a fully awakened Buddha, let's generate the determination, I will become a Buddha. In order to fulfill my primary wish to lead all sentient beings away from suffering and the causes of their suffering. And it is with this motivation that I'll study Chandrakirti's entry into the middle way. study it, reflect on it, and meditate on Chandrakirti's words. And then let's recite the prayers together. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then the 7-limb prayer directed at the front visualization. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. Okay. All right. Sorry, I forgot to keep a break after the first line of the 4 measurables. Anyway, so all right, what I asked you to do last week was to focus mainly on the self-cherishing or self-centered attitude, describing it as a type of mind that from within this mistaken way we apprehend the I as something intrinsic, something solid, concrete, that's not merely labeled on mind and body, but has this inherent or objective type of existence. Based on that, the mind that first arises is that basic misapprehension. And based on that basic misapprehension, it gives rise to the mind that perceives that self, that, well, wrongly perceived self, to be especially precious, important, exaggerating, therefore, its importance, which in turn then gives rise to attachment, holding on to it as being more important, more precious than other people, than other beings. And that, of course, then gives rise to attachment to my happiness, my profit, my success, my reputation, and so forth. Therefore, of course, then also giving rise to other forms of attachment, well, whatever attachment there is, basically, and in terms of ourselves and other things. And of course, anger, envy, which has the aspect of attachment towards one aspect and resentment towards someone who has whatever we desire, and so forth. And it is the root for all our problems. We may feel that this self-cherishing, actually we feel quite strongly that this self-cherishing, this self-centeredness, this attachment to the I, that right after exaggerating the importance of the I, it arises in the form of that holding on to it. And of course gives rise to other types of attachment. Well, we have a sense that kind of mind actually protects us. That's the mind that is responsible for our well-being, in that it protects us. But actually it does exactly the opposite. It harms us. It harms us deeply. It's responsible for all our problems, all our suffering. And the opposite mind to that mind is the mind that cherishes others. So that without having attachment towards others, but rather without seeing ourselves as more important, the mind that sees all other sentient beings as more important in the sense that I'm just one person and there are countless other people. And to quote Geshe on that, and this is what I want you to also reflect on for the coming week. Well, if you think about it, we're just looking after one person. One person is the center of everything. Of course, we may, depending on our family situation, on where we work, etc. Of course, we look after people to some degree, but we mainly focus on that one person. So if we were to put that one person to the side, if we were to look at this person as if it was someone else, and to think we're just looking after this, every need we run after, any thought there is, we right away run to fulfill whatever wish arises in our mind. And to think if we, for instance, were working in a hospital and there were so many different patients and different people requiring help and assistance, and we would just look after one person. If it's about giving money, we give most of the money to that person and just a little bit to others. The best food, everything is basically revolving around that one person. Wouldn't that feel like a waste of our time and energy? As in, like, the sense it's so unfair to just look after one person versus all these other people who are just around observing that, seeing what's going on, but not receiving any help. So just as in everyday life, if we really worked in a hospital and we would just look after that one patient and ignore everyone else, it'd be so bizarre. And I don't think we could keep up that kind of, well, focus on just one person. In the same way, that's what we do with ourselves constantly, based on that misapprehension of the I, and causing so much trouble in the sense that the moment there's this attachment to the I, there's worry. There's worry about the self. There's worry about not getting what I want, getting that which I don't want, and a whole other, well, the huge variety of worry and fear and so forth. On the other hand, if I let go, just let go of that I, and instead focus on others and start to cherish others, put others' well-being, because there are countless. I'm just one person, but they totally outnumber me. So just from the point of view of numbers, others being more important, their well-being being more important, that is said to be the gate to happiness, to well-being. And again, for this week, to reflect on this, to read, of course, if you can, Shantideva's Bodhisattva Way of Life, especially the chapter on equalizing and exchanging self for others, that part, and of course the meditation we've been doing as part of the setting the motivation. If you could continue with that as the first thing you start in the morning, and again throughout the day, to be mindful of the self-cherishing mind, the self-centeredness. When is it active? But then instead of reacting with anger or resentment towards your own self-centeredness, rather to take it with humor. All right, gotcha. There you are again. You're active. I noticed. Okay, with a sense of humor and laid back, a feeling of being relaxed about it, feeling laid back about it, and just gently acknowledge it. And if you can, just let it go. And if that doesn't work, well, to then reflect on using analytical means. If you've got the time, if you've got the space of mind in that moment, and just to try to overcome that and to bring your focus back on others, onto others. Okay, so in that way, just to continue familiarizing ourselves with compassion and so forth. And I received a question from someone. It was in the context of, well, meditating on compassion. The question was, well, actually, if we've realized emptiness, if we've definitely realized emptiness conceptually and even directly, wouldn't love and compassion just arise naturally? This question, I remember, was also asked, Geshe he once asked this, and he said he didn't have an answer to that. Really, it's hard to say, because there's also, of course, there's the potential now for it to come forth naturally, but we have these tendencies, these, well, as they're called, imprints or tendencies, habitual tendencies, that will still, even though once we realize emptiness, of course, that's huge. Even just conceptually realizing that the self doesn't exist inherently and so forth. But we still have all these tendencies, all these residues, all these imprints that were left from grasping onto the self. And anyway, once we realize emptiness, even directly, we won't be able to remove the self-grasping, the misapprehension of reality right away. It takes some time. We gradually are able to remove it, but that takes time. But even once we remove ignorance, that basic misapprehension, we're still left with these tendencies, with these imprints. And unless we totally remove them, we have tendencies left from anger, from attachment, and so forth, that will prevent us to a certain degree from naturally generating the type of love and compassion that a Buddha has. So we need to kind of make an effort to strengthen our love and compassion. It will require some effort until basically we become enlightened. This is also the difference between an enlightened and a non-enlightened being, that they will always require a certain amount of effort to generate, well, compassion and so forth. But it'll become easier and easier, much easier as we go on. So once you realize emptiness conceptually or maybe even directly, it'd be so much less of an effort than it is now. But actually, it'll require a certain degree, even if it's just a subtle type of effort, up to the moment we become enlightened. Afterwards, it's effortless. It becomes naturally, becomes totally spontaneous. All right, so that was an answer to that question. And then let's go back to the text. I'll start today. I want to make sure I make sure I don't forget the time. Now, what I like to start are the 3 consequences or 4 consequences. Chandrakirti mentions 3 in his entry into the middle way and a 4th one in his auto commentary. And those consequences are always, well, almost during every teaching His Holiness gives, whenever His Holiness gives a Dharma teaching, His Holiness mentions those. Therefore, we can assume that they're extremely important, and of course was an important part of this text. But before I do this, so forgive me if I repeat again, I want to go through the verses again, just to make sure, especially since they're so important, the topic of the true truth. So just quickly race through it again, and it won't take me more than a few minutes, and then to take you back to those verses that we got to, and then start also with what I just talked about. All right, now we started off with analyzing phenomena versus I and phenomena. The 6th chapter, of course, mainly concerned with the ultimate mode of existence, the actual mode of existence of phenomena, the way phenomena exist on an ultimate, on a final kind of level. And here we distinguish between how the I exists and how phenomena other than the I, body and mind, for instance, how they exist. Now, Chandrakirti starts off with analyzing phenomena other than the I, mind and body, and whatever other phenomena there are other than the I. So strictly speaking, he starts off with that. But of course, the I is still part of what we talk about, what we think about. But just explicitly, he mentions, well, he analyzes how do phenomena other than the I exist. And in this case, the analysis Chandrakirti applies to establish that those phenomena, body, mind, and the objects we use around, that these phenomena do not exist the way they appear. The reasoning he uses is the reasoning of denying or of negating the 4 extremes. Those phenomena around us, of course, they've arisen from causes and conditions. And so they haven't arisen from a cause that's one with itself, that is inherently different, that is both one and inherently different, and neither have they arisen from no cause. They've not arisen causelessly. Those are the 4 extremes. That a result is identical with its cause, that it's inherently different from its cause, that it's both those two, and that it has arisen without a cause. This is the reasoning Chandrakirti presents in the beginning. And we've already done analysis. We've analyzed the consequences, the absurdity, in other words, of assuming a result is identical with its cause. It's one with its cause. It's identical. That would be absurd. Likewise, we analyzed, well, the fact that a cause and its result, and here the result, of course, mainly phenomena other than the I, the aggregates, mind and body, being a result, of course, of some cause, well, they're also not inherently one with its cause. And having said all this, well, how do we get to the true truth? We've had some analysis on that, the fact that it's impossible to be inherently different because otherwise cause and effect would be totally disconnected. There would be no relation between the two, and any cause could give rise to any result, and that'd be totally absurd. You could have a peach tree from an apple seed, and so Therefore, to have that connection between a cause and its effect, so a cause having the potential to give rise to an effect, that is only possible. That is only possible if the effect and the cause are not inherently different. They're only nominally, they're only conventionally different, but not inherently different, because that would mean they're totally different. Okay. Now, in response to all that discussion, and that we come back to that discussion at some point later anyway, but with regard to all that discussion, there's an objection by someone who says, well, but look around in the world, things exist inherently because this is how they appear and this is how the world perceives them. In response to that, Chandrakirti says, verse 20, so 22 is that objection. 23, Chandrakirti says, well, wait a minute. It may appear that way. It appears that way, yes. But in actuality, there are, from the point of view of the mind that perceives something, from the point of view of the mind, there are two types of mind. And based on those two types of mind, one being mistaken with regard to the appearance of things and one not being mistaken, well, there are two truths, conventional and ultimate truth. Then verse 24 and 25, Chandrakirti says, well, look in the world, there are things too, some things that are from the point of view of the mind that perceives them, although they exist, but some of those phenomena are from the perspective of just worldly perception are false. That is, they do not exist in the way they appear. And there are those things that are not false, that are non-deceptive. Why? Because they do exist in the way they appear. As an example, well, echoes, optical illusions, they are, from the point of view of the world, they're deceptive. And then objects such as tables and cars and so forth, well, they exist the way they appear. That's at least how we look at it from a worldly point of view. Therefore, Chandrakirti argues, you see, in a similar way, we say there are these two levels of reality, phenomena that when they appear to our mind, they do not exist the way they appear. And then those phenomena, that is emptiness, the ultimate truth, when it's perceived by a directly perceiving mind, well, it exists the way in which it appears. So he draws this distinction. And he goes further on, he says in verse 26, he says, well, and just as we say, inherent existence doesn't exist, well, also according to the world, there are things that don't exist. There are non-existences, such as the way a certain self is postulated. For instance, some of the non-Buddhist philosophical systems that assert some kind of permanent I. Even beings who have no idea of emptiness, so worldly beings, in this case, someone who has no idea of emptiness, can understand that a permanent I is unrealistic. Or we can also understand that certain things, that an echo is the voice of a past, well, that's just not right. Or that a mirage of water is water, well, that's not existent. Even beings in the world that have no idea of emptiness can understand that. So we can distinguish between that which exists and that which doesn't exist, and of course between that which is deceptive, although it exists, it's deceptive, and that which is not, accounting for the true truth. All right, having said that, then it goes on to say, well, it goes on to say in 27, verse 27, going back to this original argument, though, the mind that perceives the things around us cannot invalidate the mind that perceives the ultimate nature of things. That is pretty clear, because the mind that perceives conventional truth, that believes in the inherent existence, or that has the appearance of inherent existence, that type of mind does not invalidate, even if it's correct with regard to perceiving cars and tables and so forth, but it cannot invalidate the mind that realizes emptiness. Okay, it's just as a person who's got some mental impairment, some visual impairment, well, their perception cannot invalidate the visual perception of a person who's free from that impairment. All right, that's what's clearly discussed in 27. And then 28, well, basically Chandrakirti talks about what is then that conventional truth. We've already heard it's deceptive from the point of view of existing in a way, appearing in a way in which it doesn't exist, different to the ultimate truth. And of course, also, why is it called a truth when in actuality it isn't a truth? Truth means non-deceptive. Truth means it exists the way it appears. Here in this case, well, it's truth, but it's not really a truth. It's only called a truth. It's a truth for concealer, for an ignorance, and that's why I call it a truth. So really conventional truth in the sense of truth for a concealer, for an ignorance that holds conventional truth, believes those to be existent the way they appear, as appearing inherently, as if inherently existent. And from that, we can also understand that, well, therefore, ultimate truth, here the word, just as conventional truth, conventional means truth. So true for conventional what? Ignorance or concealer. Likewise, we can understand ultimate truth means truth for an ultimate mind, which in this case means a mind that realizes emptiness directly. An ultimate truth is a truth for a mind that perceives things as they really are. And in that way, it is an actual truth versus a conventional truth that is a truth only for ignorance. This is again how we can distinguish between the two. But nonetheless, even once you remove remove ignorance, that concealer mind, from the vantage point of which phenomena seem to be a truth, conventional phenomena seem to be a truth, but are not. Even when you remove that ignorance, if you remove that ignorance, phenomena are for yourself, because there's no mind left to which the conventional things around us are truth. Still, for that person who's removed the misapprehension of reality, phenomena are still mere conventionalities. They exist conventionally. So it doesn't mean they're non-existent, even though they're, for that person, no longer conventional truth as such, especially truth. They're still truth. They will still accept that they're conventional truth for others, but for themselves personally, having removed ignorance, they're mere conventionalities. All right. And then 29, verse 29, it explains ultimate truth, but since the meaning of the word ultimate truth is already implied in verse 28, being a truth for a concealer, being a truth for, well, a meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness. So the difference between those two. So implied in verse 28 is the fact that an ultimate truth is called that because it's a truth for an ultimate mind. Well, now 29 explains an ultimate truth, not from the point of view of the meaning of the word ultimate truth, but rather it explains it based on an example, which is very effective in the sense that, well, for us, we have no idea of what ultimate truth means right now, and examples can be helpful. Here again, the example of the eye disease, particular eye disease that perceives falling hair, whatever exact disease that may be. Usually the usual senses like floaters, where you have the perception of little squiggles and dots and so forth. So the Tibetans talk about the appearance of falling hair. And again, realizing emptiness directly, having this meditative equipoise that realizes the ultimate truth. Because again, ultimate truth, as we've heard before, is usually defined on the basis of the mind that perceives it. Well, with regard to that is like a mind that is not affected by the appearance of inherent existence, which is similar to a person who's not affected by an eye disease. Okay, so this person, even if they're not a Buddha yet, but this particular mind, once they generate that type of mind is not affected by the appearance of inherent existence. In fact, no conventional truth whatsoever appears to that mind, only ultimate truth. All right. So, having said all that, then we got to come to verse 30. And here specifically, Chandrakirti, he addresses those philosophers, such as the Madhyamika Svatantrika or even the Chittamatra, but mainly the Svatantrika Madhyamikas, while Chandrakirti himself is a person of the Prasangika Madhyamika. Now, one philosophical system below the Prasangika Madhyamika is the Svatantrika Madhyamika. And now he's basically addressing those also for the consequences that are to follow. He's addressing those, and it seems initially, well, why address those? Why not talk in general? Address everyone who's accepting inherent existence. Well, the reason being, actually, these philosophers of the Svatantrika Madhyamika school, they are the closest to the Prasangika view, but they haven't negated enough yet in their effort to understand reality, in their effort to realize how phenomena really exist. And as you're familiar by now, understanding how phenomena really exist requires negating that which we've added to phenomena, as to our mind adding, projecting a type of existence onto phenomena which they have never had and could not possibly have. So that impossible existence, which is inherent existence, independent existence, whatever you want to call it, that exaggerated way of existence needs to be negated in order to understand how phenomena really exist. And the Svatantrikas have negated a lot, but not enough. However, they're so important because when we make an effort, when we start meditating on how phenomena really exist, when we do the analysis as we've discussed it before, just look for something inherently there. It's as simple as that, but of course very difficult to do, but it's easily explained. Well, if there's really something truly in a table, some intrinsic tableness, we should be able to find it, right? So therefore, when we engage in this analysis, excuse me, we engage in this analysis and we don't end up finding something, well, the thought naturally arises, well, maybe it doesn't exist at all. Then I can't find anything. So there is no table. And that doesn't make sense. Of course, the table exists. I exist. I just need to pinch myself and there's pain. So I exist. Which is why the Svatantrika says, yeah, well, it doesn't exist independently of a mind. You need to have a mind to which it appears, but it still has some inherent existence. And that feels kind of to a degree, kind of from deep within, it makes sense. There's like, oh, yeah, there must be something there. Because there's obviously a difference between a table and a chair, or a car and a cupboard, or what have you. So unless there was something there from the side of the object, to say it's just labeled on the basis of something that's also labeled and nothing there from the side of the object, well, then everything would be the same or it wouldn't be there in the first place. So it kind of makes sense. It feels right. But logically, also that doesn't make sense. But this is why the school is very important. It's also addressed here as part of Chandrakirti's text. And we'll speak more about it, but just to briefly introduce it to you, I've already talked about them a little bit, but they'll be with us for a while. I mean, they come up again and again, their views, and it's interesting. And you'll probably find your mind to feel comfortable with some of their views, like totally denying inherent existence. Oh, wait a minute. That's a bit too much. So we may actually feel comfortable with the idea that, yeah, things exist only because they appear to our mind, but they still have something there from their own side. All right. Now, these are the ones. These are the philosophers here Chandrakirti, is talking to, saying, well, you talk about Aryas, you talk about extraordinary beings. If we could have the root text again in verse 30, and the first two lines of verse 31. 30 and the first two lines of 31, yeah. So if you believe that ordinary perception, again, going back to this original state, and actually the Svatantrika also says, yeah, things exist inherently because they appear that way to the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, and with regard to that appearance, they're not wrong minds. They're correct minds. So they do accept that inherent existence appears to eye consciousnesses and so forth, the different types of mind, but they believe from the point of view of that appearance, the mind is correct. And so now Chandrakirti argues, well, from the Prasangika school point of view, looking at you Svatantrikas, if you say ordinary perception constitutes valid knowledge, in particular when it comes to this inherent existence which cannot be found, well, suchness will be seen by common folk. So ordinary people should be able to see suchness, right? Ordinary beings, common people, they should be able to perceive inherent existence. And what's the need for, should be able to see the ultimate nature of phenomena. So why do you need Aryas? What do you need them for? Why do you need Arya path? Because really it's the minds, the different perceptions of Aryas, they're called Arya path. Yet it's wrong to take the foolish mind as valid as well. So saying that, you wouldn't need Aryas, and at the same time, a foolish mind, the ordinary minds of ordinary beings, well, they're mistaken from the point of view of, well, how things appear to them, right? And actually, that would be a mistake to follow after them. And then in 31, the first two lines, since ordinary perception has no validity in every respect, no worldly perspective can invalidate in the context of suchness. So, of course, ordinary perception has a certain degree of validity, but not in every respect, not in respect to inherent existence, because we can, well, through reasoning, we can establish that inherent existence is just impossible. And we'll come to see this once we come to the four consequences. But before we get to that, this is a statement. This is still a claim, if you like. We haven't really analyzed, really. But the point is here, he's saying to these Svatantrika philosophers, he's saying, well, first of all, if you trust common appearances and common perceptions, what do you need Arya for? Arya beings for, those who've understood reality. And you can't say that an ordinary perception is valid with respect to everything. So definitely not with regard to suchness. Worldly perspective cannot invalidate anything in the context of suchness or emptiness. All right. And then the next two lines of verse 31, that is line number 3 and number 4. He's saying, but I'm not saying, even though I'm saying with regard to suchness, ordinary perception cannot be trusted, but I'm not saying ordinary perception cannot be trusted at all. That's not what I'm saying. Just only, yes, exactly, those two lines. So that were just highlighted. So everyday facts that got nothing to do with suchness, well, they are rejected from a perspective of worldly consensus, then this will be invalidated on the authority of everyday experience. Now, again, here we're not just talking about opinions. That's really important. So there was a question before, I mentioned it, and I think it's important to stress this again and again, what this person said. And they have a really valid point here. Of course, they're saying, well, it seems like convention, especially the English word, seems to be about, well, I believe this and someone else believes that, and these are all conventions, so they're conventionally true. Well, First of all, not everything that people believe is conventionally true, because those are wrong perceptions, such as the way this globe exists. For instance, in the past, we had the example before, or the belief that a certain food will help us when in reality it harms us, and so forth. One example this question also gives is that of, for instance, if one country believes they're independent and another country believes they're not, so who's wrong, who's right, and who's wrong? Well, it just it's hard to say in that situation. One of them could be wrong, could just simply be wrong, believe that I don't know, they don't have the capacity to act as an independent country, and the other country says, well, actually has the capacity and believes. So the country that claims it can be an independent country, it can be active as an independent country, doesn't have to depend on the other country. They may be right about it, and the other country that believes, etc., well, they could be wrong about it. It just needs to be analyzed. But it could also just be a matter of opinion, right? Like saying, no, we want this country to be part of us, and the people of this other country, no, we don't want them to be part of, like the Tibetans and the Chinese. The Tibetans don't want to be a part of, well, don't want to be a part, as in like some Tibetans don't want to be a part of China, and China wants Tibet to be. So in that way, is it a part of China or not? Well, it just depends on which view you take. All right. So here, a valid cognizer could say, well, from the perspective of those beings, it is, and from the perspective of those, it's not. And you can take simple objects, like one object is used as a table by one group of people and is used as a bed by another group of people. And again, does the mind that perceives that table to be a bed invalidate the other mind? No, it doesn't, because it's a bed for those, and it's a table for the other people. But saying, for instance, it's so in this case, we can say from the perspective of this person, it's like this. From the perspective of another person, it's like that. He gave the example also, of course, of the water that is perceived as water by human beings, that is perceived as pus and blood by someone else. And again, we can say from the perspective of this type of mind, it is this. From the perspective of that type of mind, it's that. And then, of course, what is important to understand here, that for a person of the Pretagram, what they perceive as pus and blood, that pus and blood performs the function of pus and blood. It has all the characteristics of pus and blood. It's not like, oh, it looks like pus and blood, but it tastes like water, or it actually has all the functions of water. That would be a mistaken mind. That would be mistaken. Then it would, for that Preta being, when they perceive that pus and blood, they would just be mistaken, because upon analysis, even the Preta being would come to see, well, it doesn't exist that way. But in the case of Preta beings, they have this appearance of water as pus and blood, and it performs the function of pus and blood. It smells like it tastes like it behaves like that. It has the, I don't know, if they have a Preta physicist or a chemist, or like a person like analyzing the structure and the molecules, they would find it has pus and blood molecules and is made of those atoms. Therefore, from the perspective of the Preta being, it is pus and blood. From the perspective of the human being, it is water. Because again, of course, it has to, of course, perform the function of water. If it is actually pus and blood, and some human perceives it as water, they're just mistaken. And a mind that analyzes the different features of this pus and blood, that's in actuality really pus and blood, but a certain human perceives it mistakenly as water, well, that mind that analyzes it and finds, oh, okay, it's made of the molecules of pus and blood and so forth, well, that can invalidate the wrong view of that human being. When it comes to taste, it's beautiful or not, it's ugly, well, that's again from the perspective of the person. But there are certain things that are, just because of the nature we have, they're just universally true, that anger causes suffering. causes a certain state of mind we describe as suffering. It's just the nature, just as, I don't know, the nature of water is to make things wet. It doesn't dry things. If you want to dry your bed, you're not going to throw a bucket of water on your bed to dry it. So it's in the nature of water to wetten things, to moisten things. So likewise, it's in the nature of anger in the person, in the mind of the person in whose continuum it arises. It creates suffering. It creates a certain emotion we call suffering because we don't want it. It's some state of mind, some experience. It's unwanted. We call it suffering, and based on its cause, we call that negative. We call that harmful. So this, for living beings, since since anger creates a certain experience, a karmic experience that we don't like, therefore we can say it's negative. Okay, so there's conventionally, it is true that it's negative, although it's merely labeled based on the fact what it gives rise to. But still, it's negative. But if this world were upside down, if hypothetically we love to suffer, we love to be unhappy, if that were the case, well, then anger would be positive because it gives rise to that which we love. But again, it would be something that is conventionally, if this is how the mind worked, we could say it is something positive. But if the world were divided into two groups, those who love to suffer and those who don't love to suffer, well, then it's positive for this one group and negative for the other. All right. So in that way, it's important to understand the distinction between merely assuming something, merely assuming it, and seeing it as a convention in that sense of just agreeing it is this, versus validating it with a particular conventional mind. If you say it is this, that, and the other, the world is flat, it means it's flat. And whatever it means to be flat, all these characteristics have to be given. It's not enough to just assume it. So the person who asked this question, you're welcome to ask again if this is not yet clear, but I just wanted to make it clear one more time. Now, let's go back to the text. Therefore, we've just heard 31, line 3 and 4. Now, verse 32. Verse 32. Okay. Now, is it verse 32? Yes, that's right. Now, that's a verse we haven't discussed yet. And it goes back to the original idea that, well, to the ordinary world, things exist inherently. And if everything exists inherently, and we have this innate sense, things exist inherently, we have an innate sense, a person, this previous objection that was part of verse 22, basically claiming, well, a cause and an effect have to be inherently different because they're different. They're not the same, they're not identical. And since everything exists inherently, well, they also have to exist inherently. But here, Chandrakirti says, well, actually, you may be right that instinctively, ordinary beings have the sense that phenomena such as I and the body and, I don't know, cars and houses and so forth, that they exist inherently, but innately, we do not perceive that a cause and then its effect exist inherently. We do not actually innately have that sense, because that would mean that things are totally disconnected. But we don't have that innate sense that a cause and a result are totally disconnected. Why? Because in everyday life, a man who simply left the seed claims, I fathered the son. So in this sense, the seed is the semen, the father's semen. So who left the seed, he claims, I fathered the son. So the father has a cause of his own son, in the sense of course, mainly the body, but still the son is labeled on the basis of mind and body. And so therefore, yes, the son is the result of the father. And the father doesn't see his son as inherently different, although it's a result and they're different, but not inherently different, because that would mean they're totally disconnected. And in everyday experience, even though those who have no idea of emptiness, ordinary people would say there's a connection between a father and his son. Or I planted this tree. If a man leaves a seed, in this case, an apple, a seed for an apple tree, for instance, well, there's definitely thought I planted this tree. So there's a connection between the two. Therefore, arising from inherently other, doesn't exist even from the perspective of the everyday world. Philosophers assume it. So philosophers, like for instance, the Svatantrika, who say, well, if the I exists inherently, if it appears, like they assume the I exists inherently and the body exists inherently, and if all these things exist inherently, everything exists inherently. So philosophically, they come to the conclusion, a cause and then its effect must be inherently different, since they're different and everything exists inherently. So even the difference between a cause and its result must be inherently different. I mean, they must inherently exist. That relation, that difference between the two must be inherently existent. Therefore, for a philosopher, yes, a cause and its result may exist inherently different, maybe inherently different, but for everyday people, they're not. That would mean for us, they would be disconnected, and that's not how we perceive things. All right. So here Chandrakirti says, to an everyday person, really, there is not really that instinctive sense of believing that things are inherently different. It doesn't, for them, no. I exist inherently, the Father exists inherently, the Son exists inherently. We perceive all that. But when it comes to their connection, are they inherently different? No, because there's a connection between them. Right? That's what it says in 32. And now in 33, Chandrakirti is kind of like summarizing. Now, our understanding of what we learned so far, right? Remember, I briefly talked about it when I started today's lesson. So what did I say? We discussed, in order to understand that the body and other phenomena, body, mind, that they do not exist inherently. What is the analysis that helps us to understand that? Well, it's the analysis. How does this body, this mind, and other phenomena, how do they relate to their cause? And based on that understanding, how they relate, that they're not inherently different, not inherently one, and so forth, we can come to understand their lack of inherent existence. And here, with these two verses, he basically takes the first two of those four extremes, and those are the most difficult to understand. Since we've learned that a cause and its effect are not one, and since we've learned they're not inherently different, in that way, we've actually removed the two extremes of nihilism and of reification. So the extreme of nihilism being that denying inherent existence, we fall into the extreme of nothing exists, and not denying inherent existence, we believe things are solid and concrete and we reify their existence. So those are the two extremes. And understanding, therefore, that a cause and its result, here's the seed and the sprout. Okay, so the sprout is not other than the seed. Understanding that it's not inherently other than the seed. That understanding helps us to understand there's no extinction of the continuum of the seed at the time of the sprout. It needs to be added, this word, there's no extinction of the continuum of the seed. The seed continues in the form of the sprout. So the seed is actually just transformed into the sprout. If the seed and the sprout were inherently different, the continuum of the seed would have stopped. It would have to stop the moment the sprout comes to existence, because they're totally separate. They're like totally separate. And therefore, the continuum of one, in the case of the seed and the sprout, the continuum of the seed would have to be cut in order for the sprout to come into existence. Okay? So it's just summarizing that. But that's not how they exist. And to get a better sense of that, you remember I asked you to visualize a seed growing into a sprout. If the seed existed inherently and the sprout existed inherently, number one, if they both existed inherently, it would be very clear if I take photographs of the seed growing into the sprout and I put up all these thousands of photographs. In each second, I take one photograph, and all these photographs, I publish them somewhere, and you need to decide when is the sprout still a sprout and when can it be called a seed, the sprout turning into a seed. Remember, I gave you that example. If the sprout and the seed existed inherently, there would be a correct answer. It would be a correct answer. Now it's still a sprout. Now it's still a seed. Now it's become a sprout. There would be a correct answer. But really, there is no sprout and no seed from the side of the object. We just call it a seed on the basis of certain characteristics. And we call it a sprout on the basis of certain characteristics. And when we really analyze all these given or not, and it's very difficult to have a clear-cut answer. That's why being conventionally existent is not about clear-cut. It's more about, well, from the perspective such and such, right? It's actually much more that sense in relation to. Okay, now going back to the idea of seed and sprout. So if they existed inherently, there'd be a clear answer. But it's just labeled. We call it a certain conglomeration of atoms, basically. They give rise to a certain appearance, the way this object appears to us, and based on that, we call it a seed. And then due to the transformation of all these atoms having changed, and depending on that, how it appears to our mind, we now call it a sprout. It's as simple as that. That's why there's no correct answer in the sense it's picture 1,000 whatever or 10,000 such and such. That's when it's still a seed. That's when it's still a sprout. You see, what we do when I give you the example of looking at all these pictures, I'm actually in a way forcing you to engage in ultimate analysis. You're looking a little closer. It's not like just accepting appearances, but it's like, or exactly when is it a seed, when it's a sprout. It's already kind of going into the direction of how do we say exactly when this starts, and this exactness, right? When I force you to be exact, that's when things start getting hazy, because we're going into the area of like, how does it really ultimately inherently exist? And of course, things start disappearing. Which is why we say also conventional truth is the truth that appears when we don't analyze. Ultimate truth is that which appears after we've analyzed. And analysis means here looking for a concreteness, like concretely it's this and it's not that, and so forth. So the moment we start analyzing, engaging in that ultimate analysis, the lines start disappearing. And it becomes very difficult to posit conventional truth, right? That's when we already we move to another area, and we need to be sure to not get confused. So without analyzing, it's this, it's that. Conventionally, we can accept that, but always be aware that it's just conventionally, like from the point of view of appearances. And there's a certain consistency that we have to be consistent, logically consistent, and all that. But the moment we start analyzing, things are different. All right. And with the photograph, that's hopefully clear how we start almost, it's kind of an analysis of how seed and sprout exist. So to determine the exact moment when they arise. That's part of their mode of existence. But if we were to say, let's now move away from saying that, if we were to say, okay, seed and sprout, not only do they exist inherently, which is impossible, but they're also inherently different. That's slightly different to saying the seed exists inherently, the sprout exists inherently. That's different. Saying they exist, they're being different. And of course, they're not identical, they're different, conventionally they're different, but saying they're inherently different, that also means they're totally disconnected. Totally disconnected. It would be like, I don't know, taking away the seed and putting in a sprout suddenly. I mean, that's not how it works. But if they were different, that's how it would work. As in, like, the seed is totally destroyed and you just put in this new object sprout in its place. That's what it would mean for seed and sprout to be inherently different. And that would mean that the sprout is not the continuation. It's not that there's a continuum of atoms continuing on and on and on and becoming the sprout. That's not what would happen. Okay. Therefore, because the sprout is no other than the seed, it says, there is no extinction of the seed at the time of the sprout, which means the extreme of nihilism is removed. Because if sprout and seed existed inherently different, the seed would totally go out of existence, and that would be a nihilistic idea. The seed would have to discontinue, and that would be a nihilistic idea. So by understanding that seed and sprout are not inherently different, we can eliminate this type of nihilism, to believe that a continuum of something doesn't go on. And that's really important. It's a very important part of Buddhism, that everything that exists is a continuum. We are a continuum. Our body is a continuum. It's made of atoms, and they continue in different forms, and they reassemble in different ways. But the continuum of something physical can never be stopped. It can only be transformed. The continuum of the mind can never be stopped, can never be cut. It can only be transformed. Okay? All right. So the continuum of anger, even anger, its continuum in the form of a mind goes on until Buddhahood. It's just the anger, that harmful aspect, that is removed from the mind. But the continuum of that mind goes on. And likewise, therefore, everything that exists is a continuum. Everything that exists, even in its moment itself, it's a continuum. It's made of sub-moments. And assuming that a cause and effect are inherently different would mean the continuum is cut. The continuum of the cause must be cut to have the result. So that's not an easy idea, but that's what it's meant here, what is talked about here, which is why once you understand that, you remove that extreme view of nihilism, that in like a continuum of something could be cut. And then, secondly, because the sprout and the seed are not identical, that's what we initially, even before negating or before refuting that cause and its effect exist inherently different or are inherently different, before we refuted that, we talked about, well, if they're not inherently different, are they identical? Does a result already exist at the time of its cause? Is there already like a miniature sprout, and it's kind of like actually the same as the sprout, right? We've had that whole discussion before. Well, if that were the case, that would mean that the seed exists at the time of the sprout, not in the form of a continuum, but literally the seed would exist at the time of the sprout because they're identical. So once you have a sprout, you have a seed because they're identical. And that would be an example of reification, making the seed too solid. It's like the seed, of course, at some point is no longer there. And holding on to the seed still existing at the time of the sprout would be the extreme of reification. All right, so here, and the extreme of reification can, of course, also be called the extreme of permanence. It's the same word in Tibetan. So the extreme of permanence, therefore, it would lead to the extreme of permanence, which means here, what does it say in 63, line 3 and 4? And because the sprout and seed are not identical, they're not one, it cannot be said that the seed exists when the sprout is there. If the two were identical, when you have a sprout, you must have a seed. No, but the seed is no longer there. So you don't end up with the extreme of reification, the extreme of permanence, of making things more solid than they are. And if they were as solid as they appear, they would be permanent. They would never change. So you would end up with the extreme of permanence. All right. that's 33. And I didn't manage to start with the 3 consequences. I thought I could, but anyway, I feel it's important to go over everything we've done so far. I hope I've made it clearer. I've said it so many times now. If it's not clear yet, please ask. Please send me a question. Just say, explain it again. The person who asked the question about compassion, there's still some questions left, and I will address them, but just not today. But yes, hopefully you get a better sense of what we talked about so far, and we'll also go over it again in the meditation today. And then next time we'll definitely start with the 3 or 4 absurdities that arise if things really exist inherently. So we finish them definitely before Thomas gives the next teachings, I hope. Today's the 21st. Yes, next week that's the 28th, and the next teachings are in March. Oh, wait, when will Thomas give next Sunday?
I think 27th, so 28th.
That's right, 28th. That's right. His Holiness will give. Well, maybe His Holiness talks about again the 3 consequences, and we still didn't get to there. But then for the next time, I don't know what His Holiness will talk about on the 28th. Is it 28th? No, it's the 27th. It's the day before that. It's the Day of Miracles. There's Holiness. On that day, His Holiness will give a teaching. Okay. Anyway, pardon?
Can I ask something now? Is this disintegratedness have to do with what you explained now, isn't it?
Disintegratedness. Yes. Very good. Yes, exactly. Yes, Varda, exactly. The disintegratedness. So the disintegration of the seed is really just the continuum of the seed, the later continuum. And that's why we say the disintegrated state of the seed is impermanent, because it really just refers to the seed continuing in a different form. So it's not saying the seed continues on, because that would mean the seed is permanent, but the continuum of the seed goes on. And in that way, this verse 33 is talking about the 2 extremes, as in like one extreme would mean the continuum of something could be cut. That would be an extreme of nihilism. And the other extreme would be something remains the same without changing. Okay, and that would be the extreme of permanence or reification. All right, so that's 33, and let's now meditate on this. Yes, well, Varda just talked about, we'll talk more about this later anyway. It'll be addressed as part of the text, but since she asked about it, I briefly talked about it. Okay, so let's please start meditating. We start with some breathing meditation as usual. Just let go of any disruptive thoughts. Just let go of possibly feeling frustrated about difficult ideas. Just let it go. And empty your mind to be ready for the analysis. it's important for us to distinguish between the conventional truth and the ultimate truth. But this distinction being made in relation to different minds, conventional truth are explained to be those phenomena that ordinarily appear to the mind when we do not engage in ultimate analysis. Objects such as cars, houses, eye, body, and so forth. Which exist as merely labeled objects. Labeled on the basis of their component parts. The basis of their functions. And in relation to other phenomena. We can even conventionally validate their functions or their existence. If we label snake on a rope, or on the parts of a speckled coiled rope, then that labeled snake does not exist conventionally. Because a valid mind can investigate whether that so-called snake performs the function of a snake. So we can understand that there is no conventional snake based on a rope. But that a snake labeled on a snake body is conventionally a snake. Yet neither the snake that is labeled on the rope nor the actual snake exist inherently. Both are just labeled by the mind. Yeah, one exists conventionally, performs the function of a snake, in other words, and the other one doesn't. And taking the actual snake has those two natures. A conventional nature, since it is a conventional truth, and an ultimate nature, since it lacks inherent existence and is therefore inseparable from its own emptiness or ultimate truth. And although the mind that realizes the ultimate truth of the snake cannot invalidate the snake. But it invalidates the snake's inherent existence. But as a conventionally existent phenomenon, conventional truth, the snake exists as a continuum. Labeled on the continuum of a snake body and snake mind. With the former moments of snake being the causes of later moments of the snake. So the former moments of the snake being the causes of the later moment of the snake. These former and later moments that are cause and effect are neither one nor inherently different. If yesterday's snake, that is the cause of today's snake, if yesterday's snake were one with today's snake, it would lead to the extreme of permanence or reification. That the snake wouldn't change from day to day, moment to moment. Yet if today's snake, that is the result of yesterday's snake, were inherently different, continuum of yesterday's snake would have been cut. Which would lead to the extreme of non-existence, nihilism, denying the continuum, the later continuum of the snake. Hence, today's snake does not exist inherently. Since it's not one with its cause, that is yesterday's snake, nor inherently different, and therefore it's not both one and inherently different. And of course, it hasn't arisen causelessly. And now to conclude this analysis, whatever feeling has arisen as a result of analyzing phenomena such as a snake and so forth, to spend a moment to just focus on that feeling, that conclusion. And then, of course, very important to dedicate the virtue we've accumulated today here together, studying, reflecting on and meditating on emptiness. May this become eventually, of course, the cause for us to remove all the misconceptions of reality from our mind and to become fully enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. But in the meantime, may it also help us to remove our daily problems and have a positive impact on our environment, on the people around us. May help those who are sick to recover very soon, like Tali Lupin and everyone else who's suffering from illness right now. And help others in the way expressed by Shantideva in his dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. And very important, for as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, great. All right. Have a lovely week. And yep, sorry, 10 minutes too late. Have a lovely week. Don't forget your homework. It's self-cherishing to identify, to recognize it, and of course to work towards replacing it with cherishing others. All right. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Geshe.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Geshe.
We'll see each other here again next week.